Okay, here we go, chapter 9. So, at the end of chapter 8, Addison confidently said, "It doesn't matter. We have the key now. We're through the worst of it." Chapter 9 is titled, Things Get Worse. Bum, bum, bum. Okay, here we go. Addison flipped open a fresh page in his notebook and took a rubbing of the key with the side of his pencil. "Voices," whispered Molly. The group strained their ears, and sure enough, shouting voices echoed through the cavern. "It could just be the priests," said Eddie hopefully. "We have to assume it's Professor Ragar," said Molly. "Either way, we have worn out our welcome." Addison slipped the Incan key into his pocket. "If we stay in this chamber, we're trapped. Come on." He strode across the cavern and waved the team back into the ossuary. "Not the skeletons again," Eddie whimpered. "Eddie, hurry," said Molly, yanking him along by the collar. Addison and his team ducked through the chamber door and picked their way down the booby-trapped steps, carefully skipping the skulls. They reached the chamber floor, only to discover they were too late. The bespectacled priest stepped into the ossuary, flanked by 6 of Professor Ragar's bodyguards. There was no escape. "There they are!" thundered the priest in his accented English. His voice rebounded off of the stone walls. "The Vienna Boys Choir!" Ragar's men swung their industrial flashlights on Addison's team. Addison recognized Zuboff, the tall man with the black ponytail and the unblinking, lifeless eyes of a predator. Addison squinted at the priest through the blinding beams. "How did you find your way down here?" "You left every door open behind you," said the priest. Addison shot an accusatory look at Eddie. "Eddie, you were the last one through every door." "What?" Eddie shrugged. "I didn't want to get locked in." "Who are you, really?" demanded the priest. "How did you find these secret chambers?" "That," said Addison dramatically, "is a secret." Zuboff shouted to his men. They lurched forward, moving in on Addison's team. "Addison, what do we do?" asked Molly. "I'm open to suggestions." "We need a miracle," said Molly. "I don't believe in those." A plan simmered in Addison's mind and slowly came to a boil. "They don't know the bones are booby-trapped, but we do." We split up and lure them into the bone piles. The 4 members of Addison's team scattered. Ragar's men chased them onto the stacks of bones, struggling to find their footing. One guard, webbed with mafia tattoos, made the considerable mistake of chasing Molly. In her cleats, her fast feet found purchase on the skittering bones. The blurry guard tried to race up a mound of mandibles. Mandibles are jawbones. But the harder he ran, the farther he slid. Molly crested the pile, her eyes darting back and forth from a hidden tripwire. The man climbed closer, reaching out a calloused hand to grab Molly's ankle. She spotted a tripwire, yanked it hard, and dove aside as a steel scythe rocketed towards the surprised guard. Terrified, he leapt from the path of the shrieking blade and tumbled down the bone mountain, striking his head on the rocky ground. The man lay crumpled in a heap of clattering foot bones. Raj climbed the cave wall, visualized a plan. He would get a running start, leap off the nearest bone pile, grab the closest guy rope, shimmy up and swing to the opposite pillar, and then jump down on the tallest guard. The plan was flawless. He took a running start, slipped on a femur, and crashed down the mountain of bones. The avalanche of shattering bones triggered several booby traps at once. Boulders tumbled from the ceiling, pelting the guard in the head. The man sank to his knees, stunned and senseless. "Great work, Raj," said Addison, impressed. "Don't mention it," said Raj from underneath a pile of patellas. Addison's team, faster and lighter than Rhagar's men, formed up at the far end of the chamber. Zubov shouted at his guards to stop chasing the kids and to block the only exit. With a sinking feeling, Addison realized his predicament. His group was hemmed in, with no hope of escape. Zubov fixed Addison with the cold stare of a hunting shark and circled in. "We're Bone," said Addison. "There's no other way out of here." "Of course there is." "Oh, excuse me, Eddie said that." "Of course there is," said Addison, trying to sound more confident than he actually felt. "We're 86ers. Simply saying the word inspired him. To his immense relief, Addison discovered that he had an idea. He rapped his knuckles against the rock wall at his back. This is a limestone cave formed by water. "That's great, Addison," Molly pointed out with an impatient finger as the guards rapidly picked their way through the bone piles, edging ever closer. "Can we please focus on the issue at hand? Water flows through the limestone for millions of years, and it forms a cave." Addison could see his team was still not following. "The water needs both an entrance and an exit. There must be another way out of here." Raj was readying himself in a fighting stance, preparing for the onslaught of guards. "If we all run in different directions, they can't catch all of us," Molly shouted. "That's not fair. They'll catch whoever's slowest," cried Eddie. "Me!" "Everybody, be quiet and listen." Addison lifted a hand in the air and cocked his ears, and then he heard what he wanted, the faint trickle of water. Addison shimmied along the cave wall until the sound of water grew louder. He knelt down and scooped away bones as fast as he could. A thin channel of water gurgled beneath the heaps of bones, escaping through a hole in the rock. Addison helped Raj squeeze into the narrow chute. Eddie backed up a step. "Are we really going in there?" "You can stay here, Eddie. It's your choice." Raj's men tightened their cordon, closing in on Addison's team. They moved carefully to avoid tripwires until they were almost within arm's reach. "Hurry," Addison called, pushing Eddie in after Raj. Molly crawled in next, head first. Zubov reached the edge of the bone pile, leapt clear of the remaining tripwires, and dashed for Addison. Addison ducked into the narrow cave and discovered his team had formed a traffic jam. "Keep moving," he shouted. He turned in time to see Zubov lunge a knife into the opening of the cave. Zubov was too large to crawl into the passage, so he simply reached a tattooed arm inside and slashed with his knife. Addison crab-walked backwards on his hands, the knife barely missing his throat. Addison turned in turned in the narrow tunnel and crawled forward as fast as he could, the rock pressing in on him from all sides. Raj's voice carried through the darkness. "I hear the river up ahead." The limestone chute grew wet and slippery. One by one, Raj, Eddie, Molly, and Addison lost their grip and began sliding down the slick tunnel. They screamed as they slipped out of control, the water flushing them down the channel, twisting and turning. Their voices grew hoarse until the wet tunnel finally spit them out, sending them splashing into the muddy Olvidado River. Addison's team gasped for breath, treading water in the marshy stream. Addison gazed up at the starry night sky, thrilled to be above ground again. "Let's get out of here." The group sloshed to shore. They scrambled up the slimy mud embankment, picked their way through the brambles and briars, and burst onto the cobblestone square in front of the cathedral. "We got the key!" Eddie exclaimed, jumping up and down. "We escaped!" Raj offered Eddie a high five that Eddie connected with on his third try. "We really did it," Molly cheered. "That was pretty close," said Addison, beaming. He turned and ran smack into Professor Ragar. The first thing Addison did was yelp in alarm. The second thing Addison did was try to run. The third thing Addison did was yelp in alarm. Professor Ragar's extra bodyguards surrounded the group, blocking off any escape. Addison swiveled his head, searching for a direction to run, and came up empty. Switching tactics, he attempted diplomacy. "Well, here we are," said Addison, struggling to regain his composure. "A fine evening, don't you think?" "You made it all the way to Columbia just to save me the trouble of finding the second key?" Ragar said in his deep, accented voice. He wore a stylish gray derby hat pulled low over his scarred face. Addison could not help but admire the sterling silver tie bar pinned to the flawless silk tie. The Cook family never ceases to, astonish me. Ragar extended his open palm to Addison and raised an eyebrow expectantly. Addison, not missing a beat, gave Professor Ragar a high five. "Thanks! Your praise means a lot, and I love your tie bar." Ragar wound up his open palm and slapped Addison across the face. Addison's cheeks stung, and his head rang for a few seconds. He bit his lip and kept his voice steady. "I can usually get along with most people, but I am having trouble finding your good side." The professor motioned to his bodyguards, who grabbed Addison by the arms. Addison squirmed, but the men were 4 times his size. Ragar fished in Addison's blazer pocket and removed the Incan key. He admired its glittering silver skin in the moonlight. "Thank you," he said. Addison could think of nothing polite to say, so he settled for a dignified silence. He studied the burn scars etched into Ragar's face. The professor's gray derby hat partially concealed where the patchy hair had been seared from his scalp, leaving only red and molted flesh. The rest of Ragar's bodyguards burst from the front door of the cathedral, covered in bone dust and gasping for breath. Ragar smiled at Addison. "I would like to introduce you to someone." He gestured to Zuboff, who sauntered forward. Addison already felt fairly well acquainted with the tall, pockmarked man. His slick black ponytail looked like a tenacious ferret clinging to the back of his head. Zuboff glared at Addison. Try as he might, Addison could detect no hint of goodwill in that gaze. His name is Borov Reykjavik, Rhagar continued, but in the Siberian prison, his nickname was Zuboff. Zuboff means, how do you say, teeth. Addison assumed this was meant to sound sinister. He raised an eyebrow appreciatively and nodded to Zuboff. Nice to meet you, Teeth. Professor Rhagar frowned at Addison and continued. Zuboff graduated from the highest level of the Russian Special Forces. He won medals in every form of combat. He is a world-class tracker and deadly with a knife. Addison nodded his head, duly impressed, though he wasn't sure he liked where any of this was going. Zuboff wasn't seeing enough action in the military, so he turned mercenary, fighting in armed conflicts around the globe until he was imprisoned for arms trafficking. He has no hobbies, the poor creature. Violence is the only thing he finds interesting. Well, Teeth, said Addison, it's a pleasure to make your acquaintance. Gunnar, I am so glad you recommended this book. Zuboff only stared at Addison, a single vein bulging angrily in his temple. I am going to leave you alone with Zuboff, said Rhagar. But first, I am curious. Why did you come for the key? You could not possibly hope to find the Incan treasure. We just wanted to get our aunt and uncle back, said Molly. You came to Columbia to free your relatives, and now you yourselves are captured? In Russia, we call that irony. We call that irony in English too, said Addison. Rhagar frowned. You say the word irony is the same thing in English as it is in Russian? Where are my aunt and uncle? Molly demanded, getting things back on track. Rhagar gestured to his black stretch limousine, parked in the shadows. Addison strained his eyes, but couldn't see through the tinted windows. Your aunt and uncle have not been very helpful so far, but I possess the gift of persuasion. Professor Rhagar nodded to his guards, who stood at attention. They are all deadly men like Zuboff, who have survived the Siberian prisons. Rhagar leaned close to Addison, his scarred face ghostly white in the dark of the night. I will keep your aunt and uncle alive as long as they help me solve the clues. But the second I don't need them anymore, they will join your parents on the other side. Addison stiffened, strained against the men who gripped his arms. What do you know about my parents? Rhagar's laugh was a raspy, joyless wheeze, like a car engine that wouldn't quite start. Zuboff? What would you like with Zuboff, do what you would like with these kids. I never want to see them again. He gestured to his men, who released Addison. The professor stepped into his stretch limousine. For a brief moment, Addison caught a glimpse of his aunt and uncle, blindfolded and gagged, before Rhagar slammed the limousine door shut. The bodyguards climbed into the caravan of black jeeps that trailed the limo. The motorcade rumbled across the muddy square. The jeeps turned the corner and disappeared into the labyrinth of Olvidados. That is the end of chapter 9.